Hi, this is Dale from Dharma Farm, and welcome to this session on how to photograph waterfalls like a pro. If you recall, in the last session we talked a little bit about gear, how to take photographs in the field, and then we were going to move it into the actual post-production process. And we used this image in the blog article and in the training tutorial to compare the two different kinds of photographs. The one you might take with a point and shoot camera, your iPhone or whatever, where you can't control a shutter speed. And then the one on the right where you can control a shutter speed, much longer shutter speed, a much longer exposure time, makes the water silky and soft, and we achieve that through the use of neutral density filters and exposures and ISO, but that's part of the other session. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that image on the right, that base image on the right, and we're going to improve on it. We're going to use some post-processing production techniques in Lightroom, and then we're going to move it to Photoshop. And I'll show you just how to make that improvement. So with that said, what I like to do is I like to start the workflow in Lightroom. Some people prefer it the other way around. They prefer it in Photoshop or strictly in Lightroom. My personal preference is to start the process in Lightroom and then move it into Photoshop. So you can see here that we have in the develop module of Lightroom, or actually in the library, I'm going to move to the develop module of Lightroom. We have the base photograph, and it looks good. You can see that the water is soft and silky and smooth, but it's really lacking a lot of punch, a lot of pizzazz. I don't think it has the kind of drama and contrast that a photograph like this is capable of. So we're going to do some basic stuff with this photograph in order to make some improvements. This is one of the introductory post-processing photographs we're going to do. This one's fairly simple. Later on, we'll get into some more advanced photographs and techniques, take it a little bit further. But this is sort of the baseline, so to speak. So what I like to do here once I'm in the develop module is I'm going to, one of the first things I do is I adjust the blacks and whites in the histogram. So if I hold down the Alt or Option key and I move the slider on the white to the right, you can just start seeing, you can see the whites coming through there. You can see how it's doing that and how it moves the histogram. I'm going to move that so that it just to the point where it just starts seeing a little bit of white. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the black. I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key, and I'm going to move that blacks to the left till I start seeing some imagery there. On the black, I typically, because I like a little bit more drama, a little more contrast in that area, I typically tend to move that a bit further than I do the white. So you can already start to see that there's a little bit more contrast, a little bit more drama in there. It's really starting to come along quite a bit better. So the next things I want to do, I think the exposure is okay. I'm not going to mess with exposure. I am going to pump up the contrast a little bit. And of course, again, this is to suit. There's no right or wrong. There's no absolute numbers that work here. And so what I typically tend to do is on these is I'll drop the highlights a little bit, not much, and then I'll pull up the shadows quite a bit. Now this slider really affects just the information in the shadow detail. So if I want a lot of detail, I can crank it all the way to the right, and you can see that in those darker areas of the cliffs where the water's coming down, there's quite a bit more detail in there. If I want it maybe a little bit more dramatic, I might, a little bit more mysterious, I might not pull it up quite so far. So we're just going to leave it at that one for now. And then the clarity, I usually pump up the clarity quite a bit. It sort of depends on the photograph and how it is. Vibrance and saturation, we're going to get into some of that a little bit later. There's some better tools I think that work for this. So what we are going to take it up a little bit. So with the vibrance, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the slider a little bit, maybe 4 or 5. Vibrance is not quite as how can I say? It's not as powerful, say, as saturation. Saturation is really easy to overdo. If you move saturation much to the right, you end up with a very HDR, high dynamic range looking photograph. It looks really overly saturated, and it's not what I'm looking for. So if I was trying to create an HDR type image, I might want to do that. But typically in these kind of photographs, I won't move saturation much. I'm going to rely on some other tools later to help us do some of that. So I'm just going to maybe move that saturation, about 5 to 7 or so. And let me see. So what I do want to do here, if you look in this area here, some of the greens, I'm just going to zoom in a bit here. Some of the greens in here are a little soft. I'd like to put a little bit more vibrance and a little bit more detail in there. So it's even too much. We'll lose a sense of direction there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this adjustment brush tool here, and that's going to bring me up the dialog where I can adjust really all the, the temperature, the tint, the exposure, all those kinds of things. Only I can affect them locally using a brush. So in this one, I'm going to take a brush and let's see that. So I think that size is probably a little bit small. So I'm just going to increase the size a bit. And again, I'm going through this really quickly. If I was to do this, as an actual project, as an actual final project, I would zoom in and I would do, minor, all kinds of adjustments, minute types of adjustments. Super detail, I'd be very picky about it. But to get the point across, I'm not going to spend a ton of time. To start, I usually like feather somewhere in around 40 or 50, and flow is somewhere in the same thing. So let's just start at flow and feather at say 40 for now. And so then what I'm going to do is what I want to adjust there is I want to adjust the intensity in here. I want a little bit more saturation, a little bit more of that yellow green in there. So, and I do that by adjusting these sliders, the temperature and the tint. And again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Every individual area of the photograph will be individually suited by what you do here. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to brush in here, and I use a Wacom tablet. You can do this with a mouse, but I find that the Wacom tablet is a lot simpler, a lot easier to use. So if you don't have a Wacom tablet, it's a pressure sensitive stylus and it works like a pen. It's an awesome tool, and we'll talk about that in other sessions in the tutorial series. But really, if you don't have a Wacom tablet or some sort of a pressure sensitive stylus, I would highly recommend getting one. So as you can see, we're starting to get a little bit more, it's maybe a little over the top, but we're getting a little bit more of that sort of green vibrancy, some of that saturation in there, just in specific areas where I want to create a little bit more drama. Maybe I want to do that in here, maybe a little bit more there. And I want to make sure that I'm not, oversaturating it in some areas, that, it maintains some degree of balance. And then I'm going to hold down the spacebar key, and I'm going to scroll up, and I'm just going to move some of this around till I get, kind of what I want. These are already pretty saturated and pretty green. Might do that in there till I get what I want. And maybe what I'm going to do is I'm just going to decrease the size of that brush a little bit. And I'm going to come in here and do some of this in here. One of the things that you can do here is you can add different brushes. I can add sort of, create new brushes. So what I do with that one is I click the new button, and it allows me to create a new brush. So if I double click on this, it'll reset those sliders to what I want. So on this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to up the exposure a little bit, I think, and maybe a little bit more of the clarity. Maybe want a little bit more clarity. And then because I'm going to work in here a little bit, maybe I do want to put some of that intense sort of green, yellow green back in there. Maybe not quite as much as that. And again, I'm going to make the brush just a little bit bigger for this, a little bit broader. And then I'm going to increase the feather size a little bit more. Let's make that 50. And then I'm just going to sort of carefully brush in this area to suit. And I think it maybe is a little over the top in here, but for the purposes of the demonstration, I think that'll be fine. If I want to see what the original picture looked like as opposed to now, what I can do is I can hold down the backspace key, and it shows me what that original picture looked like. So there's the original, and there's with the adjustments that we've already made. So you can see there's already quite a bit of difference in that. Let's just sort of zoom out so you can see the whole picture. There's already quite a bit of improvement, a lot more drama, a lot more contrast. It's a definitely more interesting looking picture. And again, I would spend a lot more time, sort of noodling that. So having said that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this into Photoshop, and we're going to do a few things in Photoshop. Some of them I could do in Lightroom, there's a plugin that I want to use. It's from the Nick collection, and I can actually do that from Lightroom. But I want to show you the sort of the back and forth trip from Lightroom to Photoshop here. So I'm going to go to Photo, and I'm going to go to Edit In, and I'm going to click Adobe Photoshop, and that will open up this image in Photoshop. And what it does typically is it's going to make a copy. You can decide whether you want to make edit the original without Lightroom adjustments, or a copy, or a copy with Lightroom adjustments. I've chosen to create a duplicate here with Lightroom adjustments, so I can see that the image that we've already made the changes to here, and what we can do with that. So one of the things that I think I might want to do here is there's just a few little spots that don't show up from a distance very well. Like, they're not actual lens aberrations or dust and scratches. Some of them, they're actually things in the picture. Like, for example, where you can see here, I think that's some sort of a leaf or something, but from any kind of a distance, it really looks like a spot. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to go to the healing brush tool, and I want a little bit bigger brush. So actually, I want a little smaller brush. So if by pressing the left and right bracket key, that allows me to increase or decrease the size of that brush. And so I want it maybe about like that, and I'm just gonna paint over that. And a couple of other places here where I see that, I'm gonna hold down the spacebar key to scroll around, and till I see if there's any dust or scratches or anything I want to remove here. That, I suppose I could keep that. It doesn't really bother me a whole lot, but just I think maybe we'll take it out. And one place to be careful of is in the water, where it gets very soft and very light colored, almost white. Any kind of dust and scratches you might have on your lens, that's probably the first place it's going to show. So you really want to check the soft waterfall part very carefully to make sure there's no dust scratches, lens aberrations or anything on there. And okay, so I think this is about where I want it now. One thing I might want to consider doing, if we zoom out here, I'm going to Control minus to zoom out, or I can do Control 0 to actually frame the picture. And this is a matter of taste. There's this little corner in the bottom right hand corner. There's a branch sticking out here. It doesn't bother me a whole lot. I like it to, it helps frame the picture, but you do want to be really cognizant in composition of cutting off corners like that. So there's a few things I might do. One of the things I could try first is I could increase the brush size, and then I could use that healing brush tool to see if I can wipe that away. And it does a pretty decent job, but it's a little abrupt there. So what I might do is the rubber stamp tool, I'm going to press Alt here to sample that area, and then I'm just going to move that in here just to give it a little bit detailed. Just want to fade that out a bit in there, and it's just so it does look a little bit more natural rather than that abrupt edge. Okay, so I'm going to press the Control 0 to frame that picture. So let's just say we got it where we want it at this point. The last thing I'm going to do with it here is there's a filter, and I've talked about it before in other tutorials, and it's the Nick collection. Google owns it now, and the Color Effects Pro I find is a really, really powerful tool, and I use it quite a bit as a final touch. You want to be careful because it's easy to overdo, but it does have a ton of power, a ton of flexibility, and just I'm not going to go through all of them because there's dozens of potential possibilities here, but one of the things that I like that it does very, very well is it increases the tonal contrast in mid-tones, shadows, saturation, etc. I think better than native Photoshop tools, and better than Lightroom in some respects. But I typically use this as sort of a finishing off tool. So I'm not going to ramp it up a lot, and let me see, I want my shadows maybe about, say, 9. Mid-tones, I'm going to try and take that up to maybe about 7. And then the saturation is probably a little bit much here. So again, too much saturation and you start getting that wild HDR effect, which you might be looking for, but you might not. I think in this particular case, we probably don't. I want to keep a lot of saturation, a lot of intensity, but not overdo it. This red bar, you drag that over. Anything to the left of that red bar is the original image, and anything to the right of that is what the Nik collection is actually doing to affect that image. And I can see that, I like it a little bit better. One area to be aware of too that you can do with too much tonal contrast is you can actually pull back in perhaps too much detail in the water here, so you can lose some of that softness. Conversely, if the water is a little too soft, if you had your your shutter speed was a little bit too lengthy and your exposure was too long, this area in here can get very, very soft looking, even too much so. So if that's the case, adding a little bit more tonal contrast in that area is one way of actually improving that. So you can actually pull a little bit more detail back into that, and that's a really nice effect. So again, just you can pull it over to compare. So this is the original, and this is what we've done with the Nik collection. And I'm just going to say, okay, I'm going to accept that. And it takes a minute usually to say save. And then you can see the final image. I'm going to I'm going to flatten that image. And then I'm just going to save it as is. So I'm not going to click save. I'm just going to save as. I'm going to click save, and that will save my changes back into Lightroom. So if we go back to Lightroom, what you'll see here is that I have two images. I have the original, and I've got a TIFF. The original image is what I did with Lightroom, but it doesn't show the Photoshop changes that we've made earlier. And so anything that we did in Photoshop will only show in that new TIFF image, as opposed to the original camera raw image that we were working with in Lightroom. Which of course is non-destructive. I could always go back to the original anytime I want in that camera raw, and take it right back to its original camera raw state. Those are non-destructive adjustments. I could have made non-destructive adjustments in Photoshop as well, but I chose not to with this particular case. One thing is it does save both copies in your library, so you'll have both copies. Anyways, so that's all I want to do for this particular session and this particular image. You can see the before and the after as we did before, and stay tuned for the next episode. Or the next session. We will do a little bit more detailed post-processing on a little bit more complex image and get into a little bit deeper dive as to what Lightroom and Photoshop can accomplish. So anyways, we will see you in the next session. Thanks very much.